Got a lot of fucking garbage ass rappers out here.
Hate wasn't loud with Prodigy. It didn't come with diss tracks, interviews, or public blowups. It came with silence, distance, and names he never mentioned again. In his world, hate wasn't an emotion you performed. It was a judgment you lived with. Once someone crossed the line, they didn't get forgiven, explained away, or rewritten into history. They were done.
To tell you the truth, I never liked Tupac until...
And the 7 artists we're talking about today didn't just upset him. They violated something deeper: loyalty, respect, legacy. The first name on this list didn't just start a beef. It set the blueprint for how Prodigy handled hate forever. The first name is no other than Jay-Z. This didn't start with takeover. It started years earlier, quietly, almost invisibly, in a way that only people paying close attention would have noticed. When Jay-Z released Money, Cash, Hoes, there was a line that suggested New York had gone soft after Snoop Dogg's arrival during the height of the East Coast versus West Coast era. For many artists at the time, it was just another slick bar, the kind of line that came and went without consequence. But for Prodigy, it didn't slide at all. To him, that statement felt like a subtle insult wrapped in confidence, a casual dismissal of what artists like him believed they had stood for during one of the most dangerous periods in hip-hop history. In Prodigy's mind, he wasn't just another rapper commenting from the sidelines. He saw himself as one of the few artists who had openly stood up to Suge Knight and Death Row Records when tensions were at their peak, when real fear existed behind the scenes, and when saying the wrong thing could carry consequences beyond music. So, hearing a line that implied New York lost its edge felt like a rewrite of history, as if the risk taken and lines drawn during that era no longer mattered. That resentment didn't explode immediately. It stayed quiet, behind closed doors, building slowly while the public remained mostly unaware. For a while, the tension lived in silence, until Takeover changed everything. When Jay-Z decided to publicly mock Prodigy by displaying childhood photos of him as a young dancer at Summer Jam, it crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed.
Getting up on the phone, me and G just dying laughing like, oh shit, this is a funny nigga. He put the picture up, word.
This wasn't clever wordplay anymore, and it wasn't competitive lyricism. It was humiliation on a massive stage, delivered in front of thousands, designed to reduce a respected street figure into a punchline. In that moment, whatever remained private between them became personal. And once it became personal, it stopped being about music. Prodigy later made it clear in interviews that this moment altered how he viewed Jay-Z permanently. What most fans never saw were the alleged events unfolding behind the scenes. According to multiple industry insiders, Prodigy took the situation extremely seriously, showing up to industry events armed and visibly prepared for real confrontation.
You know what I'm saying? Like, all right, that was funny, ha ha ha. But I'm running around with 300 niggas with guns.
As the tension escalated, reports suggested Jay-Z canceled appearances at major industry gatherings, including events tied to MTV, the Source Awards, and BET, not wanting to risk an unpredictable encounter. Cormega would later claim that he personally warned Jay-Z about the situation, telling him plainly that Prodigy wasn't bluffing, and that this had moved far beyond rap records and stage theatrics. According to those accounts, Jay-Z eventually began to back away from the conflict, understanding that the consequences could become irreversible. When the two finally crossed paths again, Jay-Z reportedly downplayed everything as just music, a statement meant to de-escalate rather than provoke. Years later, both men would publicly acknowledge each other with respect, praising one another's impact on hip-hop and their contributions to the culture. But respect, especially public respect, doesn't erase memory. It doesn't undo humiliation, and it doesn't rewrite how a moment made someone feel. For Prodigy, this wasn't something that faded with time. It wasn't forgiven. It was cataloged, remembered, and filed away permanently, becoming part of a long list of moments he never forgot. And that brings us to someone whose perceived betrayal didn't just sting his pride, but cut even deeper. At number 2, we have Nas. Nas and Prodigy should have been untouchable, the kind of pairing that felt inevitable rather than accidental, because they came from the same borough, rose in the same era, and carried the same hunger that defined Queensbridge at its rawest. Early on, they collaborated naturally, represented Queens with pride, and were widely seen as extensions of the same movement. Two voices shaped by similar streets, but expressed through different styles. To fans, it felt like a bond rooted in shared struggle and mutual respect, which is exactly why what happened next hurt far more than most people realized at the time. The tension began quietly around Cormega, a name that carried its own weight in Queens. Prodigy appeared on Thun and Kiko, a track where Cormega took direct shots at Nas, and even though Prodigy wasn't the one delivering those lines, his presence alone was enough to send a message. Nas didn't ignore it. He responded on Destroy and Rebuild, and the tone made it clear he felt personally slighted. This wasn't playful competition or friendly sparring. The response carried disappointment, frustration, and the sense that something fundamental had shifted between them. In his autobiography, Prodigy later explained how each side viewed the situation differently. From Nas's perspective, the collaboration felt like betrayal, as if someone he considered close had aligned himself with a rival who openly questioned his credibility. From Prodigy's point of view, the issue wasn't personal attacks, but principle. He believed Nas hung out with people that did not like him.
The dudes that Nas hang out with from Queensbridge, a couple of the dudes that he hang out with from Queensbridge, they don't like me.
Neither side felt fully understood, and that gap became impossible, close. What followed wasn't a dramatic back and forth filled with diss tracks and public insults. Instead, it was distance. Conversations stopped. The warmth disappeared. There were no loud confrontations, just cold silence and words that never got spoken. That quiet separation lingered for years, creating a tension that fans could feel even when it wasn't openly addressed. When Prodigy passed away, Nas finally gave voice to emotions that had gone unspoken for too long. In his music, he expressed regret openly, wishing that certain misunderstandings had been resolved before time ran out. Those words revealed something deeply human beneath the rivalry, showing that love never truly disappeared. But regret also confirmed what many already suspected. Even with respect, even with admiration, some wounds never fully healed. Love existed, but so did unresolved pain. And if that kind of tension feels complicated, the next name on this list crossed a line that could never be walked back. This brings us to number 3, Tupac Shakur.
I've never liked Tupac until I like songs like Keep Your Head Up. That was cool, you know what I'm saying? But Keep Your Head Up wasn't what Mobb Deep was doing.
The East Coast versus West Coast era was already dangerous, a time when fear wasn't exaggerated and paranoia wasn't imaginary because the tension in hip-hop had moved far beyond music and into real life. Artists watched what they said, crews moved carefully, and every public statement carried weight. Then, Hit 'Em Up dropped, and whatever balance still existed disappeared overnight. Tupac didn't just aim at a rival coast in general terms. He called out Mobb Deep directly, naming names and making sure the message landed without any room for interpretation. What made it worse, and what pushed the situation past the point of normal rap hostility, was Tupac's decision to reference Prodigy's lifelong health condition in the record. That wasn't competitive lyricism anymore, and it wasn't about who had the sharper pen. It was deeply personal. The kind of line that stayed with someone long after the music stopped playing. For Prodigy, that moment changed everything, and unlike many rap conflicts that fade with time, this one never softened. Prodigy never let it go, and he didn't pretend to. Even after Tupac's death, he continued to speak critically about him in interviews, accusing him of intentionally escalating tensions during a period when things were already volatile and unpredictable. In Prodigy's view, the situation didn't need to go that far, and taking it there made the entire culture more dangerous than it already was. Some fans believed time would eventually smooth things over, that distance and loss might bring understanding or reflection. That never happened. When Tupac passed away, the door to reconciliation closed permanently. There was no private conversation, no chance to clear the air, and no opportunity to reframe what had been said. The conflict froze in time, locked into the moment when the line was crossed. What remained was an unresolved beef that could never evolve or heal, only exist as it was. And that permanence wasn't an exception, it was a pattern. Because next up is a conflict that barely played out in public, but behind closed doors, it carried just as much weight. Ghostface Killah takes the 4th spot. This one confuses people, mostly because what the public saw and what existed behind the scenes never fully matched. On the surface, there was respect. After Prodigy passed away, Ghostface spoke highly of him, praising his humility, his presence, and the weight he carried in hip-hop. On stage, tributes reinforced that image, with nothing but love being shown, as if there had never been any tension at all. To fans watching from the outside, it looked like a straightforward relationship built on mutual admiration and shared history. But beneath that public respect, Prodigy had quietly expressed something very different in interviews over the years. He admitted that he didn't fully trust Ghostface, suggesting that there were moments when information was passed around that didn't sit right with him, situations where stories felt altered or intentions seemed unclear. Prodigy never accused him of anything dramatic or criminal, and he never launched a lyrical attack. Instead, he acknowledged a feeling, a sense that something was off, and in his world, that feeling mattered more than public perception. What makes this tension unusual is how restrained it remained. There were no diss tracks, no headline-grabbing interviews, and no public back and forth to feed the rumor mill. The conflict lived in silence, expressed through distance rather than confrontation. For Prodigy, that quiet withdrawal wasn't weakness or avoidance, it was a decision. Once trust was questioned, movement changed. Interactions shifted, lines were drawn without being announced. This wasn't hatred in the dramatic sense that hip-hop fans are used to seeing. It was suspicion, subtle but powerful. And in Prodigy's world, distrust carried lasting consequences. When trust broke, even slightly, it reshaped how relationships were handled moving forward. That mindset explains why some conflicts never needed to explode to be real. And just when it seems like Prodigy could separate personal feelings from professional situations, the next entry proves that business and emotion didn't always stay in their own lanes. That brings us to 50 Cent at number 5. Before Mobb Deep ever signed with G-Unit, Prodigy already had questions, and they weren't small ones, or the kind that could be brushed aside with industry smiles. In multiple interviews, he openly challenged 50 Cent's narratives, suggesting that the image being sold to the public was often stronger than the reality behind it. He implied that marketing, branding, and strategic storytelling played a much bigger role in shaping 50's persona than most fans were willing to admit. This wasn't an attack driven by jealousy or competition. It was skepticism rooted in principle, a belief that authenticity mattered more than numbers or buzz. Then the deal happened, and everything shifted overnight. When Mobb Deep officially aligned with G-Unit, fans were stunned. Some saw it as a betrayal of everything Prodigy had previously stood for, especially given his earlier comments. Others viewed it as a survival move in an industry that had become increasingly unforgiving. The reactions were split, and that division only added to the tension surrounding the decision. To many observers, it looked like a contradiction, as if Prodigy had suddenly abandoned his own standards. Prodigy didn't see it that way. He explained that the music industry had changed dramatically, and adapting to those changes didn't mean he suddenly agreed with everything he had once criticized. From his perspective, signing with G-Unit was a business decision, not a personal endorsement. The alliance made sense on paper, offering exposure, resources, and relevance at a time when the gut landscape demanded constant visibility. Professionally, it worked, but personally, the skepticism never disappeared. That's what made this situation so layered. Prodigy was able to separate opportunity from belief, even when that separation confused people watching from the outside. He didn't suddenly rewrite his opinions or pretend his earlier doubts never existed. Instead, he operated within the reality of the industry while holding on to his internal judgments. The distance between him and 50 Cent wasn't built on anger or open hostility. It was built on unresolved belief, a quiet awareness that alignment doesn't always equal trust. This wasn't hatred fueled by rage or personal insults. It was distance shaped by principle, by the feeling that something didn't fully add up, even if the business arrangement made sense. That kind of distance doesn't announce itself loudly, but it lingers, influencing how relationships unfold over time. And while nothing exploded, publicly between them, the tension was always present beneath the surface. And if that kind of quiet discomfort feels tense, the next situation takes things even further, involving real streets, real consequences, and a story that many believe should never have been made public at all. Number 6 is Noor. In My Infamous Life, Prodigy pulled back the curtain on an incident that many people felt should have stayed buried in the past, detailing a violent encounter involving Noor in Queens during the late 1990s. According to Prodigy's account, Noor was jumped by members of his crew, and what followed was immediate retaliation that turned the situation chaotic and dangerous. The way Prodigy described it wasn't casual storytelling. It was vivid, direct, and unapologetic, which is exactly why it stirred such a strong reaction once the book was released. Noor later responded publicly and confirmed that the jump did happen, removing any doubt that the incident itself was fabricated. However, he strongly disputed several key details. He denied being robbed, challenged the way certain moments were framed, and questioned why Prodigy would even choose to revisit a situation that ultimately resulted in one of Prodigy's own associates getting injured. To Noor, the issue wasn't just about accuracy, it was about principle. There were certain moments from that era, he felt, that were never meant to be turned into public narratives. That's where the real conflict lived. Not in the violence itself, but in the decision to put it on record. For Noor, street situations carried an unspoken rule about what stayed private and what never crossed into books or interviews. Prodigy clearly saw it differently. From his perspective, telling his story meant telling all of it, even the uncomfortable parts, even the moments that reflected badly on everyone involved. Despite the disagreement, they didn't turn into open enemies. They continued speaking, acknowledged each other, and avoided escalating the situation further. Still, something shifted. The trust wasn't the same, and the disappointment lingered beneath the surface. It was one of those conflicts that didn't explode, but quietly changed the dynamic forever. And that shift leads perfectly into the final name on this list, because unlike the others, this beef didn't stay lyrical, and it didn't stay contained behind pages or interviews. Keith Murray ends the list at 7th position. This one was messy from the very beginning, publicly, privately, and in ways that spilled into real life, making it impossible to contain or soften after the fact. It started with Prodigy's infamous Prelude, where he took pointed shots at rappers he felt were more focused on space-themed lyrics, flashy concepts, and surface-level talk, rather than substance and authenticity. The lines weren't direct, but they were sharp enough to be felt, and Keith Murray felt them immediately. What might have passed as general commentary to some landed personally with him, setting the stage for a conflict that would refuse to stay quiet. At first, it seemed like the situation might fade. The two briefly crossed paths at a video shoot and appeared to squash the tension, at least on the surface. To outsiders, it looked like another example of hip-hop disagreements cooling off once egos settled. But beneath that temporary calm, nothing was truly resolved. The underlying resentment lingered, waiting for the next spark, and it didn't take long for that spark to arrive. Prodigy reignited the tension on LL Cool J's I Shot Ya, slipping in another jab that Keith Murray couldn't ignore. This time, there was no ambiguity and no room for misinterpretation. Whatever fragile piece existed instantly collapsed. What followed wasn't lyrical sparring or studio competition. It moved out of the booth and into the real world, where consequences were immediate and unpredictable. The situation escalated into a physical confrontation outside the Tunnel nightclub in New York, one of the city's most iconic nightlife spots at the time. Prodigy later referenced being struck during the altercation, even noting that it happened in front of police, which only underscored how far things had gone. This wasn't rumor or exaggeration. It was an acknowledgement that the beef had crossed into territory where music no longer mattered. From that moment on, there was no coming back. The conflict didn't cool with time, and it didn't quietly disappear into history. Prodigy and Keith Murray continued trading words for years, and the tension became unmistakable. The dislike was no longer subtle or coded. It was open, visible, and deeply personal. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a conversation or a verse. It wasn't miscommunication or bruised egos. It was open hostility, born from perceived disrespect and fueled by pride, and once it reached that level, it became permanent. Looking at all 7 names, one thing becomes clear. Prodigy didn't hate impulsively. He hated deliberately. Every conflict followed the same arc: disrespect, memory, distance, permanence. Some beefs cooled publicly, others never got the chance. But none were forgotten, and that raises the final question. If Prodigy was this quiet, this deliberate, and this serious about who he cut off, how many stories never made it to music? How many grudges did he carry that we'll never hear about? And in today's era, where everything is public, would someone like Prodigy even survive without being labeled controversial? Let me know what you think. Which name surprised you the most? And which one do you think hurt him the deepest? Because if this list proves anything, it's that in hip-hop, silence can be louder than any diss track.